From here to the stars, I am your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. Our guest today is Patrick Grove. Patrick Grove is a space scientist and serial entrepreneur. He is co-founder and chief science officer of the Spring Institute for Forests on the Moon, a nonprofit organization dedicated to space ecology and developing closed ecological life support technology. His research has included work on passive thermal control for biological CubeSats and conceptual designs for a lunar waste treatment wetland. He also founded and eventually sold several websites at an impressive valuation, demonstrating his entrepreneurial skills. He has a master's degree in controlled environment agriculture. Thank you, Patrick, for taking the time for this interview.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
Okay. As the chief science officer of the Spring Institute, you are working toward the highly ambitious goal of creating a self-sustaining lunar forest. What do you estimate needs to be the absolute minimum size and biological diversity of this ecosystem to ensure it is robust enough to survive independently on the moon?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, or maybe billion-dollar question. Of course, I don't have the concrete answer for you yet, because that's what we're trying to figure out. But if I were to give some estimates, I would say, well, first I would ask if you're familiar with Biosphere 2, which I hope that people who are listening to this with an eye to space ecology are. That's Biosphere 2 is this facility in near Tucson, Arizona, where they ran the world's largest closed ecological system experiments, and they put 8 people inside of a giant terrarium that spanned 3 acres and had 7 different interconnected biomes inside of it. And they lived in there for 2 years. And they ran this experiment twice, and there were some issues with the experimental design or perhaps the management of the experiment. So it has a bit of a black mark on its history, but nevertheless, we learned a lot from that. And one of the things that we learned was about scale-dependent phenomena in closed ecosystems. Like how big does something need to be before you can expect weather to happen? Because there are certain abiotic factors in an ecosystem like wind or precipitation, which are basically a result of temperature gradients, but that requires a specific scale to manifest. I'm not really sure what scale that is yet. I guess if I had to give a number, I expect that you could get a reasonably self-sustaining, like with some degree of intervention, ecosystem in, I don't know, maybe the size of like a indoor like hockey or basketball court or something. If the ceiling was 25 meters tall, I would just want something big enough that you can have room for a lot of variability in micro niches. That's kind of the one of the big things that determines an ecosystem's resilience is how much heterogeneity you have in like the abiotic factors. So if you can create a lot of different pockets of different microenvironments, then you sort of buffer the whole system against any change by providing banks for life to recover in, as it were. And then the second part of this was, what kind of diversity would we require to keep this system relatively self-sustaining? And that's also an interesting question, because ecologists are somewhat divided on whether or not biodiversity is actually helpful to improving ecosystem resiliency. It was the agreed upon, best practice for a long time, but recent papers that do modeling of ecosystems showed that it's not necessarily always the case that a more diverse system will be better at weathering disruptions. Ultimately, it's a trade-off between ecosystem resilience, its ability to bounce back from perturbations, and ecosystem resistance, or maybe that's not the word rigidness, maybe, but which is the ability to tolerate the disturbance in the first place. And if you're thinking about a setting like the moon, where we more or less are going to determine what the environment this forest lives in, there should be very little perturbation because we control the weather and the temperature and everything else. So in that case, resiliency is not that important because there should not really be any like perturbations for the system to bounce back from it. In fact, if there are, they're definitely of the magnitude where it's, if there's like a pressure loss or something, then the magnitude of the perturbation is already too big for anything to bounce back from. So sorry, that's another non-answer to the question, but I would say that personally, I do still lean towards the diversity is strength idea. So I would want to have at least a handful of redundant options for every functional group in the ecosystem. Functional group being, like your producers and your consumers and your decomposers. But there are a lot more, even more niche functional groups than that, of course.
That brings up a good point. Farmers or agronomists on Earth, they're always dealing with something perturbing, so to speak, their setup. I mean, farmers are, they're protecting the field against insects and the weather, and just everything's trying to work against them. On the moon, they're not going to be dealing with that.
Well, actually, no, I have to disagree with you because
okay.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
There's certainly when we send biology experiments up to the ISS, for example, they are very strictly controlled, and preventing forward and backward contamination from other planetary bodies is a really big deal. But in real life, there's no way that humans are going anywhere without all of our associated pests. It's just not practical in any long term to keep it that way. Okay. I mean, like even at the most basic level, like humans are holobionts, meaning we are composed of our own cells and also the cells of many thousands of species of bacteria and viruses that outnumber our own cells. So anywhere we go and we're bringing these pests with us. And even if they're not currently pests while they're in our body, it's pretty trivial for bacteria to rapidly evolve to fit new niches. And consider that we have E. coli in our body now, which is like a common soil bacteria. It would take no time at all in the high radiation environment of space for E. coli to mutate back into a pathogenic variety of E. coli. So that's kind of, especially when you consider that it probably already has those genes inside and they're just deactivated in this particular species of E. coli. So this is another problem with the idea of truly independent, self-sustaining ecosystems is genetic drift. Like nothing will stay the same genome that it started with. And so imbalance is necessarily going to happen.
Before I ask the next question, I would like to mention, usually these interviews are arranged by Les Johnson, formerly of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, because he knows so many great people for me to interview, and sometimes by Joseph Meany, president of the Interstellar Research Group, and even occasionally by James Birchfield, who is chair of the publicity committee at the IRG. But this one was arranged by Livian von Dran. So thanks, Liv.
Yeah, Liv is a good friend. It's great to meet our two worlds here in this podcast.
Yeah. As a longtime futurist myself, I used to do a podcast for about 10 years called The Future and You, in which I interviewed people for their opinion about the future. And produced 485 episodes of that. So I consider myself a futurist, even though I'm not actively going that direction right now. As a longtime futurist, I view the idea of forest on the moon as inevitable, eventually. But it wouldn't occur to me to push for it right now when the number of people on the moon can be counted on the fingers of 0 hands. What are the advantages of pushing for it now?
To be clear, also, I want to say this up front just to dispel any illusions. We're not talking about terraforming the moon. We're talking about slapping a nice dome on it and growing some trees in there. So it's pretty much right off the bat, much easier goal. I agree with you. We're probably kind of far from a forest on the moon. I'm still optimistic it'll happen in my lifetime, especially as Artemis promises to go back and put some permanent infrastructure on the moon. This is the time to start imagining how we want to live on the moon. And specifically what we're trying to do at my organization, the Spring Institute for Forests on the Moon, is we're trying to change the current paradigm of life support systems, which are all run by complex machines that require a lot of energy and exotic materials in order to keep people alive. And we're trying to instead do the same way the Earth does it, using ecosystems to provide ecosystem services that are what support us here on Earth. And there's definitely trade-offs between using what we would call a bioregenerative, or more accurately, an ecological life support system versus the standard physicochemical life support systems. But ultimately, it's not a matter of like feasibility. Both are quite feasible, and we've got great examples of both. It's a matter of priority in terms of like where we're spending our research money. Like NASA used to spend quite a lot more money researching these types of things. Like from the very beginning of spaceflight, they had already foresaw the need to use plants to keep people alive in space. But they've progressively over the decades, especially since the 2000s, I think in 2004, NASA ended the CELS program, which is the Controlled Ecological Life Support Program. And that kind of marked the end of investigating this method of keeping people alive. But other places in the world are still working on this. The European Melissa program is doing a very similar bioregenerative life support research. We know that the Lunar Palace in China has also been doing some of these things. Of course, the Soviets were doing it at the exact same time as NASA with many of the same results. So all I'm saying is that this is a great time to bring it back up, because now we're deciding what it's going to be like when we live on the moon. We know that this is possible, and we've demonstrated it in the past. It really just requires a willingness to continue researching it.
In the early years of human habitants on the moon, the ceilings are unlikely to be 100 feet high. What species of trees have you selected to start with?
Yeah, this is a good question. I would argue against the ceilings being 100 feet high, because I'm a fan of living in lava tubes or like lunar pits on the moon, which could be a couple 100 meters tall.
Oh, okay.
However, it is also true that that's still not enough, because with 1/6 gravity on the moon, we expect plants to grow much taller than they do here on Earth, especially if they don't have any like wind. That would be the primary thing keeping them down. I guess we get to control how much wind they have. So actually, if you're familiar with Ray Wheeler, who's a legendary plant scientist from NASA Kennedy, in a conversation once where we were talking about forests on the moon, he said that he's often thought about, like he said, it's like one of his hopes or his dreams to grow a redwood, like a giant sequoia on the moon, because they could probably grow over 1 kilometer tall, which would be magnificent, I'm sure. Yeah, right. It's really hard to think about. But nevertheless, I think actually some of the plants we'll start with will be much shorter, because height isn't necessarily an advantage for us. And it'd probably be more utilitarian. Bamboo is a really easy answer, because it's very useful for a wide variety of like living things. You can use it as a construction material. It can be used in waste treatment, can be used for fiber production, etc. And also it grows like a weed. So I would be surprised if it wasn't happy to grow in our nascent moon forest. But if you wanted to get more technical, we are really committed to trying to grow this forest through principles of ecological succession, which is how every ecosystem forms here on Earth. When a new environment, a new habitat is unveiled, either because a volcano makes a new island in the middle of the ocean, or a glacier retreats and uncovers some rock that hasn't seen light in thousands of years. This environment is completely sterile. It has no life in it yet. And here on Earth, ecosystems follow a very predictable pattern, depending on like where they are in the world, of succession, which allows like more complex ecosystems to thrive there. And like the general pattern of succession is this bare rock is colonized by some lichens or by algae, depending on how wet it is. And then those kind of break down the rock over time by secreting acids, which turn it into, like, literally physically break it. They like send down, not literally roots, these are plants with roots, but they'll send down hair-like filaments into the rock, which will swell and bust it open. And eventually you get kind of a sandy substrate, which is just enough for other plants like grasses or mosses to put down roots. And then these form the symbioses with bacteria, which are also working on this sandy substrate. And eventually, as all these plants die, their organic matter is incorporated into the sand. And over time, the water and the organic matter and the sediment comes together to form what we know as soil. That's what pedogenesis is. And that is what enables like the plants that you and I are thinking of. Like now bushes and stuff can thrive here. And when that happens, it creates the micro habitat that tree saplings need in order to be protected from the wind or get the right amount of sun. And so we would love to take raw regolith from the surface of the moon to remediate it using a combination of these techniques that plants are already using here on Earth, and then to slowly build real soil out of the stuff that we're out of the ecological succession process, so that it can support the forest. So that will necessarily take much longer than just importing dirt and planting trees on the moon, but it will be a testament to the tenacity of life. So I guess if I was going to pick another tree species in the early successional phase, it might be something like a larch. I recently went to Alaska and saw a bunch of places where the glaciers had been moving, and saw this like a tableau of ecological succession from nothing to moss to grasses and then trees like larches. That was very inspiring.
Closed-loop ecologies have been attempted in the past with poor results. On the other hand, the Earth itself is a closed-loop system, and it's been supporting life for over 600 million years, albeit with a few notable hiccups, such as the loss of the dinosaurs. But that was no fault of the Earth's. How will yours be different from those that failed?
Well, of course.
And I'm saying failed in kind of a...
Yeah.
I'm half serious. I mean, it was a valiant attempt.
I would object to failed. We're talking about Biosphere 2, I assume.
Yes.
And to be clear, there were several other closed ecosystem experiments, like BIOS, especially BIOS 2 and 3 from the Soviets. NASA had the CELS program and the biomass production chamber, although they rarely locked people in there. China has Lunar Palace. Japan also has SEAF, controlled ecological something facility. Sorry.
I had no idea there were so many.
Yeah, there have been a handful over the years. But Biosphere 2 is the one everyone thinks of because it was by far the biggest. There's also, unlike the other ones, which you could kind of argue were bioregenerative rather than ecological because they separated all of their ecosystem services. Like, this is really pedantic, but if you have an algae photobioreactor, it's got like a single species of algae in there. It's highly optimized. Only nutrients go in and only algae comes out. And it's not an ecosystem. It's just a machine that's using biology, right?
I watched a video about a guy. How much algae do I need to survive?
I saw that one. It's a good video, and it's a great way to think about this kind of thing, because I think for him it was like 200 gallons or something.
It was a lot.
Yeah, and if you look at the literature, we think that we could do it with 80 liters worth of algae, probably. Keep one person alive, that is. Well, in terms of oxygen. But back to Biosphere 2, it was contentious. And I think that the media was unfair because they turned what was an earnest attempt at science into kind of a spectacle. And moreover, the thing that everyone will quote as like its failure, which was at some point during the first experiment, they realized that the oxygen in the system was running down. Like normally it should be at around 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, but they were having troubles keeping it above 15%. And they couldn't figure out why. And like the stoichiometry wasn't mathing out the way they expected. And it was because at that point, nobody realized that concrete, which is something, concrete cures for decades. It's a material that never actually stops curing. And as part of the curing process, it consumes oxygen. And so they built this entire structure with all of this, tons and tons of concrete, which was slowly breathing all of their oxygen. And it was something that nobody had ever had to account for because no one had ever built a hermetic structure that big. And so that was something that they only realized after the experiment. And what they did during the experiment was they brought in a CO2 scrubber in order to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and restore the balance. And this was a violation of the closed ecosystem experiment. That's true, but
it was a necessary cheat, but it was still a cheat.
It was, yeah. The real problem was that they tried to hide it. Like they didn't announce that they were bringing it in. They just did it and then didn't say anything about it. And when it obviously came out, people were in uproar because they cheated. Yeah. But like any scientist who has run real experiments knows that these sorts of unexpected things happen all the time, and there's a procedure for it. And you just write this data has a big asterisk on it because we had to do this thing that was out of the protocol.
But that's why you run the experiment, to find out what's wrong, what's going to go wrong.
Exactly. And so they did manage it poorly, but I have the utmost respect for everyone who was involved in it, both inside the biosphere and outside, because they did do quite a lot of really excellent science in biospherics and in closed ecosystems. And in fact, I did my master's at the University of Arizona solely because they run Biosphere 2 now, and I wanted access to that facility. Unfortunately, they don't actually do closed ecosystem experiments anymore because it's no longer a closed facility. They do just other kinds of ecosystem experiments, especially with modeling climate change, because they have a whole rainforest in there that's under a glass dome. And so it's like 60 degrees Celsius at the top of this dome, which is a great model for what the Amazon might look like in a couple decades.
Considering the limitations of current technology, what is the key component, whether biological or material, that you developed or identified that enables your systems to support long-duration missions with zero failures? And since a catastrophic failure would mean death, zero failures is the real goal.
Yeah. To be clear, we're definitely not at the place where we're developing entire self-sustaining ecosystems that support humans. In fact, yeah. Well, we've decided to do kind of a bottom-up approach to this problem, where rather than trying to build Biosphere 3 and hoping that it works on the first go, we are tackling individual aspects of life support, like specific functions, and then trying to replace them with an ecosystem solution, not just a bioregenerative solution. And so, for example, we are not actually working on food production because there's already lots and lots of people working on food production. But if I were, it would be the physical chemical solution for this is you have prepackaged food. Or maybe you like do that thing where you synthesize proteins out of air if you're very fancy. The bioregenerative solution for this is to have a hydroponics rack where you're growing your vegetables and the nutrient solution. The ecological solution for food production is to do soil agriculture. And this has some advantages over the bioregenerative one, such as, it costs less to start. And also it is not prone to failure in the same way that mechanical parts are. Or if it is prone to failure, it would be in ways that are like biological, like such as pests maybe or disease. But all of these are pretty treatable either manually or simply by just restarting the whole crop. So when you said to look for, like, how are we preventing failure? Because failure would kill everybody. It turns out that, like, your biological backups are actually pretty easy, because biology is already doing that all the time. Like, seeds from plants will store for years or decades or longer. Same thing with the bacteria that are critical to run our waste processing. Like, that can very easily be frozen and be rehydrated, warmed up, and then used, reinoculated. If you were really desperate, you could maybe gene edit your way back into the bacteria functions that you require. That's a bit sci-fi, though. Like, nature already has contingencies for these things. Like, the seed bank exists, and every scoop of soil you'll find propagules, reproductive units from thousands of bacteria and bugs and plants and fungi. So, like, really the only thing we have to do is provide an environment in which they can thrive, an environment that's like Earth. And that's actually a problem for the engineers, not for me. So that's convenient too.
The Spring Institute is also actively working to democratize space access in underrepresented countries. What technological architecture or data sharing agreements are you using to make sure that your organization's work will be accessible globally?
That's an interesting way to frame the question, because I would actually say that, well, first of all, we're still a pretty nascent organization. We're only a few years old. And so the amount of data that we have collected is not huge. And it's all publicly available in manuscripts that are published at open source outlets. But really, when we are talking about doing education outreach in those countries, it's not like a data sharing agreement. I don't really think that they have much use for this kind of data. It's more of we're trying to kickstart, like, for example, we have friends, colleagues, and volunteers who live in Rwanda, and Rwanda technically has a space agency, but not really. And so for students who are going through school in Rwanda, like, there's not much in the curriculum in the way of space, especially if you go to university in Rwanda. They have, astronomy courses and stuff, but they don't have a very strong, like, aerospace engineering base that you can learn these sorts of skills. And what happens is, if a Rwandan person is really loves space and they want to become a rocket scientist, they go to school somewhere in the West. And then in order to continue working in this industry, they have to stay in the West. And this causes brain drain. Like, we're just stealing talent from these countries. And it is a vicious cycle where they never then get the expertise they need in order to shore up their own foundation. And so that's the kind of problem that we're trying to solve here by working with people from Rwanda that are already volunteers in our organization. And then they coordinate with local universities or local primary schools to help us put on, like, for example, hackathons. We did not do one this last year, but we did the past few years, like a hackathon in Rwanda where the students that participated were given, like, specific coding challenges or design challenges to work on what a closed ecosystem should look like and what will the mass flows be, or can you code the sensor suite for this automated greenhouse thing. So hopefully we're building skills that are both immediately useful and also skills that can be broadened out into a secondary education if that's what they're going for.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to show our education outreach initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And for my last question, do you look forward to visiting or perhaps living on the moon? And do you hope to walk through those lunar forests that you are promoting here on Earth today?
Yeah, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. Ultimately, I'm somewhat selfish, and I'm doing this because I hope I can sit under the tree in whose shade I sit in the shade of the tree that I planted on the moon.
Okay.
Which I know you're supposed to do for the people that come after you, but I want to see a 1 kilometer tall redwood. So yeah, that's the goal. That's the dream.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time for the interview. It's great stuff.
Absolutely. This was really fun. Thanks for talking with me, Stephen.
That was Patrick Grove. This has been From Here to the Stars, a video series created by the Interstellar Research Group. The IRG is a non-profit organization dedicated to thoroughly exploring the science and engineering that can eventually open up the reality of interstellar travel. Join us December 2nd to 4th, 2026 in Venice, Italy for the Interstellar Research Group's second European Interstellar Symposium. Learn more at irg.space. I have been your host, Stephen Euin Cobb. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and you can subscribe to our channel for other such videos. On behalf of all of us here at the Interstellar Research Group, I thank you.